26. It's going to be so huge. It's going to be huge. It's going to be fantastic. You're fired. That's right. Go on. Get out of here.
You're fired. You're fired. You're fired. You're fired.
There have been a few surprises during my first month as Prime Minister. For example, I hadn't expected to spend so much time dealing with wildlife. Belugas, ostriches.
You're fired. Get out of here.
The world is watching.
It's not a great little reel. And that was put together by friend of the show, Katie Pasitne of Universal Ostrich Farms. Of course, she was on the show yesterday. We're actually recording the show was on yesterday. But I just love that reel. And it's really, really, really well done. You're watching Stand on Guard. It's a Sunday afternoon now. We're broadcasting live from Ottawa. I'm your host, David Krayden. We're going to be doing, I hate to use that phrase, deep dive, but something akin to a deep dive into Venezuela and what it means for Canadians when we come back.
The Prime Minister lied and his minions continue to lie.
Your home is your castle. We're calling on the government to introduce and immediately pass the Stand on Guard law.
But we also need to resolve to resist.
Okay. We'll do it live. Okay. We'll do it live. I'll write it and we'll do it live.
So before we get into what it means, what this invasion means, this occupation of Venezuela means for Canada, and yes, this is all about oil, not just the invasion, but for Canada, it's all about oil. Let's just have a look at what people are saying about Venezuela and what it means.
Saudi Arabia, forget about the Saudis. I mean, we have more oil. I mean, infinite potential. And we're going to open markets. We're going to kick off the government from the oil sector. We are going to privatize all our industries. Venezuela has huge resources, oil, gas, minerals, land, technology. And as you said before, we have a strategic location, hours from the United States. So we're going to do this right. We know what we have to do. And American companies are in, super strategic position to invest. This country, Venezuela, is going to be the brightest opportunity for investment of American companies, of good people that are going to make a lot of money.
Okay, that's the Venezuelan opposition leader, Marla Machado, winner of the Nobel Peace Prize for 2025. Here she is saying, we'll do it all for you, Donald. Just get rid of Maduro, Nicolas Maduro, and we'll come through. What do you think Donald Trump is going to do about that?
Are you U.S. aware of the location of opposition leader Machado, and have you been in contact with her?
No, we haven't. No, we haven't.
Mr. President,
Do you have any hesitations about Machado?
Mr. President, on Monday.
Oh, I think it would be very tough for her to be the leader. She doesn't have the support within or the respect within the country. She's a very nice woman, but she doesn't have the respect to be the leader.
So holy shit, holy crap! If you support Donald Trump, well, you might not get his friendship in return, or his friendship will be, shall we say, skin deep. So Donald Trump doesn't seem to be too concerned, even where Marla Machado happens to be at the moment. And the country's in a bit of chaos. There's military intervention going on. There's guns are firing. There's violence. Donald Trump's not too concerned about the whereabouts of Marla Machado. And never mind, forget her pretensions about perhaps being the next leader of Venezuela. Well, no, she doesn't have the support, and Donald Trump is just turning his back on her. I find that really, I have to say it. And you know I love Donald Trump. Yes, I love Donald Trump. You've read my columns in Human Events for years praising Donald Trump. But when he pisses me off, I'm going to say it. And that's really, really disgusting what he did there.
Would run Venezuela.
Well, it's largely going to be for a period of time. The people that are standing right behind me, we're going to be running it.
All right. So Marco Rubio, who Donald Trump used to refer to as Little Marco, when Marco was running against him in 2016 for the Republican presidential nomination. Marco Rubio is not only going to be the Secretary of State, he's going to be the de facto president of Venezuela, kind of like Douglas MacArthur when he took over Japan in 1945. MacArthur was not the president. He was just sort of named by the United States as the de facto leader of Japan. So this is what Marco Rubio is apparently walking into here. This is just fascinating.
Oil. The president says the U.S. is taking over the oil. The question is, I guess, if the purpose of the operation was to capture Maduro and bring him to justice, why does the United States need to take over the Venezuelan oil industry?
Well, we don't need to. First of all, let me go back up. We don't need Venezuela's oil. We have plenty of oil in the United States. What we're not going to allow is for the oil industry in Venezuela to be controlled by adversaries of the United States. You have to understand, why does China need their oil? Why does Russia need their oil? Why does Iran need their oil? They're not even in this continent. This is the Western Hemisphere. This is where we live. And we're not going to allow the Western Hemisphere to be a base of operation for adversaries, competitors, and rivals of the United States.
Okay, so according to Marco, if you don't live in the Western Hemisphere, hands off Venezuelan oil. Venezuela will not be allowed to sell its oil. I thought Venezuela was a sovereign state and had a seat in the United Nations. No. From now on, the U.S. will decide who Venezuela is allowed to sell its oil to. Now, I'm not going to say anything more right now. We're going to have a look at some more response, more clips about this, because this is fascinating. Here's what CBC had to say some months ago.
Drug boats from Venezuela. Talk of regime change in the oil-rich country is ramping up. A shift that could have an impact on Canada's energy sector. Our Aaron Collins now on why regime change in Venezuela could bolster the case for another pipeline to the Pacific.
Now, I'm going to get back to that. I'm going to show you this one first.
My number two adversary in the region, Russia. I mean, I've got, of course, the countries, Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua with Russia relationships. But why this region matters, with all of its rich resources and rare earth elements. You've got the lithium triangle, which is needed for technology today. 60% of the world's lithium is in the lithium triangle: Argentina, Bolivia, Chile. You just have the largest oil reserves, light sweet crude, discovered off of Guyana over a year ago. You have Venezuela's resources as well with oil, copper, gold. We have the Amazon, lungs of the world. We have the 31% of the world's fresh water in this region too. I mean, it's just off the charts. We have a lot to do. This region matters. It has a lot to do with national security, and we need to step up our game.
Okay, so rare earths, but oil. Now, the Trump administration has been contending for months now that any action taken against Venezuela is going to be as a result of the drug cartels, the drug trade. Well, did you know not a single ounce of fentanyl, whoops, the F word, is coming from Venezuela? Well, maybe something, but it's minuscule. It's coming from China, yeah, Mexico, Colombia. Colombia is the biggest drug cartel country. And so does this have something to do with oil? And how is this going to affect Canada? Let's go back to the CBC piece. This is actually not bad.
Off the coast of Venezuela, a show of force on the high seas. The U.S. seizing a Venezuelan oil tanker.
Large tanker, very large. Largest one ever seized, actually.
That after the U.S. destroyed more than 20 boats it alleges were being used by Venezuelan drug runners.
Right now, the world is seeing the strength of American resolve in stemming the flow of lethal drugs to our country.
And as the U.S. military presence in the area grows, talk of regime change is building too. But as pressure mounts on Venezuela's president, some question U.S. motivations.
Of course, oil and the prices of oil is something that moves Trump administration towards Venezuela.
Venezuela has the largest oil reserves on the planet, but years of mismanagement and underinvestment have seen exports crater, dropping from a high of more than 3 million barrels a day to about a quarter of that.
The country has massive reserves, the largest in the world, but they are unable to exploit them. And that is obviously a major vulnerability, but it's also one of the reasons why the United States is interested in Venezuela.
Venezuela's oil is similar to that produced in Canada's oil sands. A resurgence in oil exports from Venezuela, a potential challenge for Alberta's oil patch.
It would be a direct competitor for Canadian barrels into the U.S. Gulf Coast market.
But even with regime change, rebuilding Venezuela's energy sector would take time.
Political change can happen very quickly. Industrial change takes a long time.
Still, if more Venezuelan oil eventually did enter the market, Canadian barrels shipping to the Gulf Coast could fetch a lower price. Another reason some say diversifying markets for Canadian oil makes sense. A deal between Ottawa and Alberta laying out terms for a new pipeline to the Pacific intended to do just that. The case for that line bolstered by a potential change in Venezuela, according to some analysts.
And the only real security we can have in any future eventuality is optionality. And I think the main thing that the West Coast Pipeline buys us is additional, essentially a doubling of that non-U.S. route export optionality.
As unclear as the future is for Venezuela's oil industry, the possibility of a new pipeline to Canada's West Coast is equally murky. A project that still has no private proponent and no route, but plenty of opposition from neighboring BC and coastal First Nations. Aaron Collins, CBC News.
So let's have a look at, here's the pipelines right now. Nothing on the West Coast. Yes, we can still transport our oil, export our oil to the United States. Of course we can. That's where we go. But the whole idea of having a pipeline through Alberta to the West Coast, through British Columbia, is so we can export our oil to somebody else other than the United States in case the market dries up there and they start buying more oil from Venezuela. Now, as that piece noted, Canadian oil, Alberta oil, is virtually identical to Venezuelan oil. It's heavy crude. It's heavy in sulfur. And the United States has more refineries that can deal with that kind of oil than it can with the United States' oil, which is a lighter crude. So that's why, yeah, the United States has lots of oil, but they can't refine it because they don't have sufficient refineries to meet the supply and demand. So if Venezuela is offering cheap oil that is controlled, a price controlled essentially by the United States, why would they buy Alberta oil when it's very high priced oil and will get more expensive with the industrial carbon tax applied to it? This could have catastrophic economic consequences for Alberta and Canada, as long as Alberta is a part of Canada. Because Alberta oil, as Jeff Rath has said many, many times on this program, he's legal counsel for the Alberta Prosperity Project. This is one of his criticisms of the MOU between Premier Daniel Smith and Prime Minister Mark Carney. It's that the industrial carbon tax going up by 300% is going to make Alberta oil that much more expensive and less appetizing to the United States. Now that the United States controls Venezuelan oil, it's going to be really, really All of these refineries, lots of refineries, but they are geared towards the heavy sulfuric heavy crude produced by Alberta and Venezuela. Are you getting scared about this? This is a great little clip.
Need Venezuelan oil, and I can kind of understand your point, because if you look at just total oil production, look, this is up until 2005, the US was there, Venezuela was there, Saudi Arabia was there, but as you probably know, since then everything has changed. Look, American output has gone through the roof, way above Saudi Arabia, and Venezuela has gone basically to the floor, and that's kind of post-Chavez, Maduro. They're one of the minnows now, and I think 21st biggest producer in the world. So again, that question, why should America care? Well, in the US, that big rise is largely down to this. It's down to the shale revolution. So you've got fracking all around the US producing extraordinary amounts of crude oil. There are various different types of crude in different parts of the world. There's actually kind of various different ways you can categorize it, but one way you can look at it is look at the kind of density. So you're basically looking at how thick that crude is. And when I say thick, I mean literally how thick. This is showing you global production broken down by the density of that oil. And if you look at kind of some of the refineries in America, so here are some of the refineries. There's one in LA there. These are the 10 biggest. You've got some up here around kind of towards Canada. We'll kind of come to that in a second. But a lot of them are down there, kind of Texas, Louisiana, on the coast. And here's the critical thing. These refineries are primarily set up for heavy oil, for taking that gloopy stuff and turning it into gasoline and all of the other different products. But here's where things get interesting. And remember that chart I showed you a moment ago, the one which showed kind of shale oil and how it kind of went through the roof? The oil that's generally produced with shale oil, the fracking oil, that comes out of the ground mostly in the light form. So if you look at the kind of imports coming into America, in recent years, even though America is producing so much oil, more oil than it ever produced before, it still needs to suck in loads of oil from overseas. And the type of oil we're talking about, it used to be, it's mostly heavy crude. It used to be only 12%. So only 12% of imports were heavy, gloopy crude. Now, it's about 70%. So 70% of the oil coming into America, which it needs to basically keep its economy going, is heavy crude. And the upshot is, even though America is producing more and more oil, the imports, this is showing you imports of oil into America, are still really high. And if you break down those imports by the country that stuff is coming from, well, there's Venezuela, and it used to be a decent slug, actually more coming from Venezuela just about than from Canada, just at the turn of the millennium. But now look at what's happened since. Right now, Canada has gone from 15% of all of the US imports of oil to 61%. 61%, and Venezuela is basically next to nothing. But here's what's tantalizing, and here's the reason I think that a lot of people are looking towards Venezuela and thinking, well, there's more to this than just drugs. Look at total oil reserves around the world. The higher these bars are, the more oil there is in the ground, so that hasn't yet been taken out of the ground. So there you've got Saudi, Iran, Iraq, all of the usual suspects. But the biggest of all, and this is according to various different sources, the biggest of all is Venezuela. And what's that oil? It's the heavy, tarry stuff that you might well want to put into those American refineries. And there is really only one other place in the world that has a kind of serious amount of heavy oil other than Canada and Venezuela. And lo and behold, guess where that is? It's Russia.
Wow. That is a fantastic encapsulation of why this is bad news for Canada. Very bad news for Canada. And let's have a look at the reaction to this. Because it's so easy to say, oh, Maduro is a bad dude. Let's get rid of him. But what comes next? And what does the United States have to do to make that what comes next happen? We've been here before. 1965. 85% of Americans supported the war in Vietnam because it was the right thing to do to keep South Vietnam from going communist, to keep the commies in the north. And had I been a voter, had I even been around at that time, I would have agreed with that position because I have been a lifelong anti-communist. I hate communism. I supported every American intervention in Central America on the basis that it was fighting communism during the Cold War. So I'm not someone who's soft on communism. Never have been. I supported what happened in Nicaragua with the Contra forces under Ronald Reagan. In fact, I have supported anti-communism throughout my life. However, this is not about fighting communism, and I don't believe it's even about fighting the drug cartels. I believe it's about securing control over Venezuelan oil and reasserting some kind of Monroe Doctrine in 2026 when it's, shall we say, a little passé to do that. The United States is acting like a colonial power under Theodore Roosevelt in 1901, 1905, not 2026. And the irony is, as the United States is plummeting towards economic disaster because of its loans and because of its deficits and its massive debt, it's starting to act like it's the greatest colonial power in the world. And of course, it is in terms of its influence around the world, but that's so fragile, it's collapsing. Now, let's have a look at the reaction here from all the good folks out there, because it is interesting. Very interesting. Yeah, I encourage you to watch my interview yesterday with Katie Sidney. I've got a clip to show you later about that, but now the opinion on this is quite divided. There's Sam Cooper, a journalist I really trust. Says hours after President Trump said the United States had carried out a large-scale strike in Venezuela and extracted President Nicolas Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores, from the country, federal prosecutors in Manhattan unsealed a sweeping indictment that portrays Venezuela's top leadership, including several former justice ministers, as the hub of a long-running cocaine enterprise aimed intentionally at the United States. Well, I'm not surprised they found this. And God knows how many people in Congress are making money off drugs. But anyway, we talked about this about a month ago, that Venezuela was the home of Dominion voting, and that Donald Trump has blamed Dominion voting on the results of the 2020 election, which he lost to Joe Biden. So if that's got something to do with invasion, Donald Trump should be saying so as well. Okay, so there's joy and laughter in the streets. The Venezuelans are now doing the Trump dance, the YMCA. Yeah. Here we go. And Pierre Poilievre. Congratulations to President Trump on successfully arresting narco-terrorist and socialist dictator Nicolas Maduro, who should live out his days in prison. Whoops. The legitimate winner of the most recent Venezuelan elections, Edmundo Gonzalez, should take office along with the courageous hero and voice of the Venezuelan people, Maria Corina Machado. But of course, Donald Trump's not even sure where she is. So, okay, so the only people opposed to this intervention are a bunch of commies. Really? No, actually, that's not true. And we'll find out why in a minute. But of course, the mainstream media is saying, if you're uncomfortable with this, you're a leftist. Well, believe me, I'm no leftist. I'm uncomfortable with this because I think it could tank the price and the availability or the acceptability of Alberta oil. And that's where this is going. But the question is, how is this going to affect Canada? Pierre Poilievre has a wife who's originally from Venezuela. So I understand why he's saying, great, good. Venezuelans free. Well, no, they're not free. How many times has the United States intervened in the post-Cold War world and found that the plan didn't quite come to fruition? Actually, every time. Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, just to name a few. Things didn't work out the way they were supposed to because the objective was never clear. And that's the problem. In the Cold War world, the objective was very clear. And that's what I liked about the Cold War world. You could understand it. It was comprehensible. The objective of the United States getting involved, intervening in other countries was to stop the spread of communism. And generally it worked. Sometimes, though, they had to align themselves with people who were just as bad as the communists, who had just as much or just as least respect for human rights as communism did. But at least you knew why they were there. And right now, there's all this bubble about drugs and saving Venezuela from a socialist dictator. Does Pierre Poilievre understand how this is going to affect Alberta oil? He's a member of parliament from Alberta. He's been in parliament for 21 years. The province that votes most faithfully for the Conservative Party of Canada is Alberta. Does he understand the impact this is going to have? He certainly seems to understand the pipeline. He certainly seems to understand how the United States has been taking advantage of Canadian oil prices over the years. But does he understand that Canada produces the same kind of oil as Venezuela? And now that the United States is going to have unparalleled access to Venezuelan oil, it's bound to affect whether or not they continue to buy oil from Alberta. I hope Pierre Poilievre understands this because it's crucial to where we go from here. Now, I want to play a clip. I love watching Judge Napolitano, and Judge Napolitano is no Marxist, no commie. I would probably describe him as a libertarian. He just changed the intro to his show. So we hear Ronald Reagan at the beginning of the show talking about how freedom is fragile and is only one generation away from failing. So this is a man who is not some sort of leftist sympathizer. And neither is his guest here, who is a former CIA analyst. Let's hear what he has to say about the operation in Venezuela.
Is churning, Larry, because it appears the neocons have triumphed after all.
Well, it's a temporary triumph. Let me first say, I love your new introduction. That's a great way to start 2026.
Thank you. You can thank Chris for that.
It expresses the real purpose of why we talk and why we care.
Correct.
Look, you remember George W. Bush on the deck of that carrier? Mission accomplished?
Yeah.
Remember Jerry Bremer? We got him. This is just another one of those. This is the early theatrics surrounding a stupid, dangerous, destructive policy by the United States. It's easy to launch a Delta Force operation. You know, they were supported by Task Force 160, the helicopters, the special helicopters, special pilots specifically trained. They probably actually had some Rangers inserted early to try to ensure that they could get in and get out. And we can't rule out the possibility that a couple of Maduro's generals were bought off to facilitate the U.S. getting in, getting out with Maduro. But, you know, the notion that this is going to, quote, solve the problems and make Venezuela great again, it's just nonsensical.
Has Donald Trump just bought for the United States another Vietnam?
He's bought himself a tar baby by his, initially.
I love that analogy, a tar baby. You know, the folklore, the fairy tale. The more you hug the tar baby, the more tar you get on yourself, and the more you become immersed and attached to the tar baby. So it looks like it's something you can contain until it starts unraveling and getting all over you. Every foreign intervention is fraught with potential difficulties, catastrophes, and disasters. And this operation, which seems to be, it looked like they bought off the State Department in Venezuela. It looks like they bought off the military. This is a former CIA analyst Larry Johnson. He knows what he's talking about. The CIA routinely will buy off government bureaucrats, politicians, so that it's easy to just arrive. But what happens next? What about when people say, well, we don't want the United States running our government, running the country? The United States ain't leaving. Well, then it gets sticky. Let's listen to some more of this.
He said, oh, this was a regime change. We're just arresting a criminal overseas. And then, okay, we're going to be running Venezuela until we figure out what the government is. So that means this is another new expression of U.S. regime change where we're going to try to control it. Here's the problem with Venezuela. Let's assume that 70% of the population of Venezuela support what has been done. They're glad to be rid of Maduro. There's still another 30% out there. They've got guns. They've got access to the borders of Brazil and Colombia that are uncontrollable. Look at Colombia as an example. Colombia has been fighting the FARC, the Fuerzas Armadas Revolucionarias Colombianas, since 1964. 61 years. The government of Colombia, with the backing of the United States, with U.S. military special forces, have not been able to contain, kill, or destroy the FARC. They have remained a presence in Colombia. You're going to see the same thing here in Venezuela. There are going to be no-go areas. And whatever U.S. personnel show up on the ground to quote, rule Venezuela initially, they're going to have to be heavily protected. And I can't rule out that there's going to be what we will call terrorist attacks. Of course, when my ancestors were doing it to the British back in 1776, we called it fighting for freedom. But, we'll label what the Venezuelans are doing as terrorism because they're fighting a foreign oppressor. But there will be casualties. And at that point, Trump's going to be facing the pressure to increase the troop presence, just like we did in Vietnam. Oh, we got to increase it. Just a few more bodies and we'll be able to quell this. Venezuela is too large and it's too difficult a terrain to control. Launching a specialized operation in Caracas in the middle of the night, that's one thing. Ruling it day to day, mission impossible.
How can the United States government possibly run the government of Venezuela, as the president said several times earlier today, we plan to do? Are Pete Hegseth and Marco Rubio going to become the co-governors of co-colonial governors of a sovereign nation that's also a member of the United Nations?
Yeah, if they do that, that's going to be the equivalent of putting Cheech and Chong in charge of a pot shop. Okay, I mean, for God's sake, they're not even able to run their own departments right now as it is, and yet they're going to quote govern.
Putting Cheech and Chong in charge of a pot shop. Now, if you're not old enough to remember who Cheech and Chong were, they were two potheads who were very well. I don't know if they were in real life. Cheech Marin and Tommy Chong, the characters they portrayed in their films were two potheads who were always stoned on marijuana, and they got into all kinds of misadventures. But I'm not sure that's the most accurate description of Marco Rubio, but it's funny.
Govern Venezuela. Look, the issue in Venezuela, it's always going to be the money. The people with the money in Venezuela, they're going to ultimately be calling the shots because they have what it takes to hire bodyguards. They have what it takes to hire security. They will, they'll make a deal with the United States if necessary. But there are those who, if they're not properly taken care of, if the rights aren't respected, they're going to fight back. And this also is going to create a bit of a vacuum that's always filled by some aspiring entrepreneur. The fact that Trump's using the pretext of combating international narcotics, and yet as it was a great moment in this press conference where he's making that line, and one of the reporters said, "Yeah, but you just pardoned the former president of Honduras, who was convicted for massive amounts of drug trafficking. And Trump, well, that's different. He's our guy. He was persecuted by the Bidens.
Yeah. It's always differing standards. And of course, if the drug dealer cartel leader is useful to America, well, then we can forgive that. We can look the other way. And it's absolutely frightening. But here's the point I've been trying to make here. Think about this before you get on the bandwagon, because we've been here before. I've been here before. Like I said, I would have 100% supported Vietnam had I been alive and an adult at that time, because I'm a lifelong anti-communist and I wanted to stop the Viet Cong, to stop Ho Chi Minh in the North Vietnamese. I would have thought that was a great thing to do, not knowing that the United States never really wanted to win that war. They just wanted a war so they could keep the military-industrial complex fed. There was never any intention of winning Vietnam. And unfortunately, in the process, millions, literally millions of North Vietnamese died, and 60,000 Americans died and were sent home in body bags. Well, 58,000 exactly. But it seemed to be a good bet at the time. So did Afghanistan. But look how that ended. In absolute and abysmal withdrawal, leaving billions of dollars of military equipment there. Taliban back in charge again. After almost 2 decades of American influence in that country, and Canadian influence, and British influence. Yeah, they were all there. How about Iraq? Well, no, that didn't work out rather well either. You know, Saddam Hussein, the enemy of the world, most evil dictator in the world. We got rid of him, and things went to hell in a handbasket in Iraq too. And just as Larry points out, George W. Bush lands on an aircraft carrier, gets out in his flight suit, returns the salute of the naval officers and men, and says, "It's over. We've got it. The show is over." That's just when it was starting. So it looks pretty good in Venezuela today, but just read your history, because it never seems to turn out the way we want it to turn out. And for Canada, this could be devastating for the economy, because God only knows what Donald Trump is up to here. And like I say, nobody has said nicer things about Donald Trump. Sealed the border. What came out against diversity, equity, and inclusion, came out against so-called gender-affirming care, called it gender mutilation, said biological males should not be competing against women in sports. Like, did a lot of great things. But he also said he was going to be a president of peace, and he was going to stop foreign wars. And I think Venezuela, the last time I looked, is a foreign country. It's not a United States principality. It's an independent country. And where does it end? You have to ask that question. How many other countries are going to be on the block? How many more regime changes are coming? Because if it can happen in Venezuela, it can happen in a lot of countries where there's disagreeable regimes, where there's really nasty leaders, and the United States can't look after them all. And nor should they. Leave it up to the people. I want to show you this clip from our interview yesterday with Katie Pasitne from Universal Ostrich Farms. I think this is a powerful statement. I encourage you to read to actually read my Substack, which I'm going to find for you here. Yeah, hold on. Hold everything. Hold everything. Yeah, I almost forgot. Yeah, read my Substack today. Canadians, rise up to hold tyranny accountable, says Katie Pisitney. And I'm quite proud of this. But have a look at this today and listen to this brief clip from almost, it was a 50-minute interview, and I think you'll love it. I know you're exploring some options, and one very significant option to get the quarantine lifted at the farm. It still looks like a war zone. It still looks like hell on earth. You can't clean up. You can't touch anything. Yeah. And you're forced to look at the results of this massacre and this occupation and this outrage. If the quarantine could be lifted in the next week or two, would that still be helpful? We're into January. And of course, the CFIA is saying not until at least spring are we going to lift the quarantine. Would it be helpful to get the quarantine lifted a lot sooner?
I mean, yeah, it is. There's a benefit to it, of course. I mean, we've been messaging Canadian Food Inspection Agency, emailing them, letting them know that the quarantine's over. There was no viral threat. Show us proof of active illness. That we had well surpassed our 100 and however, I think it was about 180 days after virus had been found. And that was in December of 2024. It's over. We are done. How they handled this quarantine, it is clear that there was never a quarantine. They would have disinfected their vehicles. They would have wore consistent PPE. They would have had a certified company handling biohazardous waste. They wouldn't have left our animals killed out in the field overnight for anything to get to them for prey to eat or whatever to scavenge on. They definitely wouldn't have left this hay bale mess out there, littered with blood, littered with shell casings. There's no quarantine. Let's just be honest. This was all a theatrical display of punishment for using our voices. We're very sure, and in our opinion, they stole our science. They didn't just steal our science, they stole ostriches. I know that sounds crazy, and everybody's going to be like, oh God, here they go again. They stole ostriches. We've been asking, you want to be a hero? Be the whistleblower, because they're out there somewhere between here, Saskatchewan, Ontario. If you know where our ostriches went, you can be an international hero. So there's no quarantine. There isn't. And we just keep saying that to them. Could it help us? Yeah, because we want to do a full investigation on the damage that they caused. Our fields are destroyed. How they left our fields and those hay bales, the mess, the massacre, the blood, the shell casings, right close to streams and artesian wells of springs. They, again, should be investigated. They smashed our cameras. They didn't just unplug them. They smashed our cameras off the barns, the front faces of them. Again, asking the question, why can't you have cameras that were there for security for our animals, for predators? I guess like CFIA. Why can't you have those cameras? If you're not hiding anything, what was wrong with having those cameras operating or just unplugging them? That would have been probably much more sufficient than just smashing them off. It would help us because then we could just do a full an investigation, I guess, on the damage. But at the end of the day, there's no quarantine. Where it's a joke. It's a joke. I think we have to become raw and with where we're at, and if we keep allowing our country to go in the direction that we're going, we are a fully communist Canada. We have major problems if we do not wake up right now. Our poor farmers are under attack everywhere across our country, and we need to stand up against agencies like the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. But I do know one thing that is so exciting for me. They're known all over the world. So the one thing that they got was everybody knows who the Canadian Food Inspection Agency is. Everybody is looking into them. Everybody is trying to understand, how did this happen? How was this allowed to happen? And it's not going to go away. 2026, I really do believe, is going to become a year of accountability.
I think you're right, Katie. I think 2026 will be a year of accountability for a lot of things, and we're gonna fight for for that to happen. I want to show you this here before we go. The shift could have profound consequences for Canada. Talking about what's happening in Venezuela. While the U.S. repositions itself to secure energy dominance and geopolitical influence, Canada is bogged down in internal disputes over carbon taxes, pipeline cancellations, and costly carbon capture mandates that erode competitiveness. Instead of leveraging our vast resources to strengthen North American energy security, we risk becoming a passive bystander and watching investment and strategic relevance flow south. Excellent, excellent words. These are words of warning. This is what could be happening. We're going to be following Venezuela throughout the week to see where this is going and to see the impact it's going to have on Canada and what it really means. And beware of a knee-jerk response on this, because look at history, anticipate the future based on what has happened in the past. And this is all very important. Thank you so much for watching today. This has been David Crayden broadcasting to you live from Ottawa. This has been Stand on Guard. God bless you. We'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you for sharing this station with your friends and family. Thank you for hitting that like button, because I tell you, we are fighting back in a way I've never had to before, because I'm going to keep this station on the air. I am going to keep fighting for freedom. I'm going to keep fighting for justice and truth. And I am damn determined to resist this Carney government in any way possible as it encroaches upon our individual freedom. And it will continue to do that, mark my words. I'll be back again tomorrow. Same time, same place. 10 a.m. This has been David Crayden, broadcasting live from our nation's capital in Ottawa. Thank you for watching. We'll see you again tomorrow.